Everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Well, His Excellency so many faces, really is standing room only, so thank you all very much for coming, and good to be making a prompt start. So, welcome everyone to this panel event, a Bright Blue event in partnership with the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition. My name is Joe Harrison, I'm a senior researcher at Bright Blue, and today we'll be chairing a discussion on Brave New World, fighting corruption and kleptocrats in the age of Trump. So, corruption and kleptocracy perhaps more salient today than perhaps at any point in recent memory. This month we've seen fresh scandals around sort of PPE procurement, following on a consistent stream of sleaze allegations plaguing this Labour government. But these headlines are just the tip of the iceberg, and we're going to be talking today about the sort of some more deeper problems in transparency. So, Bright Blue, just a quick bit of introductory. We're an independent centre-right think tank for defending and improving liberal society. And our 5 main research themes are economy, energy, environment, education and employment, and social policy. So, for anyone that's tweeting today or any kind of social media posts, we please ask you to tag Bright Blue using the hashtag Bright Blue as well. And excellent. So, we'll go on now then to introduce our speakers. We've got some excellent real expertise on this topic today. So to my right, we've got Sir Andrew Mitchell, Conservative MP for Sutton Coldfield, and has held senior Foreign Office and International Development roles, background covering overseas governance and development assistance, portfolios obviously that intersect with anti-corruption policy and the UK's diplomatic levers that it can use in that domain. I've got John Penrose on my left. John was the UK's anti-corruption champion from 2017 until 2022. And John has been centrally involved in sort of public advocacy and policy design on anti-corruption, a cause that he continues to champion as chair of the Conservative Policy Forum and the founder of the Centre for Small State Conservatism. On my immediate left, I also have Kat Neelan, who is a senior excuse my voice, senior political journalist and commentator, currently the Whitehall editor of The Observer, formerly at The Telegraph, New Statesman and Tortoise Media, and she specialises in UK politics and governance with a focus on accountability, ethics, and the intersection of money, power and influence in Westminster. And last but not least, on my far right, we've got Daniel Bruce, who is the representative from, he's the current chief executive of Transparency International UK, which has produced civil society evidence base on opacity in the UK property markets, in trusts and beneficial ownership. So, to give you an overview of the format today, I'm going to ask our esteemed panellists to give a 4-minute introductory remark each. I will be strict on cutting them off, so we've got plenty of time for the questions from you all here today. And we're also live streaming this event. So for anyone that's watching at home, you'll also be able to contribute to the Q&A that follows. So 4 minutes each from our panellists, and then I'll open up to the audience that is both here and the audience remotely. And those watching remotely can ask their questions through Slido, where there is a link in the bottom, in the description of the YouTube video. So, that's all out of the way. That's my blurb done. So I'll now invite each panellist to speak up for 4 minutes with brief remarks before we do the Q&A. So first up, I'll hand you over to Right Honourable Andrew Mitchell. Very
strict instructions about the 4 minutes. So I shall, there's the clock here to ensure. This is a very serious subject. I'm afraid it's one in which Britain has a dog in the fight. And the reason for that is that credible research, including by the National Crime Agency, suggests that something like 40% of money laundering, illegal, dirty money, goes through Britain and British territories. That's through London, it's through the overseas territories, and through the Crown dependencies. And remember, when we talk about dirty money, this is money stolen from Africa and from Africans, money from the sex trade, money from the drug trade. And the fact that it's going through British territories and Britain in substantial amounts is something which should concern us. It certainly concerned David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. It was the subject of the 2016 G8. He said then, and with very considerable approval, that Britain would introduce open registers of beneficial ownership. We've done it. It hasn't not worked quite as well as we had hoped because of the nature of Companies House, which was more a library than a place of investigation, but progress has been made on that, not least under John's time as the anti-corruption czar. But we set an example, and it was of having open registers for beneficial ownership. And the reason you need to have that, and the scales fell from our eyes when we had the publication, I think by The Guardian and the BBC, of the Paradise Papers. We saw that without having those open registers, although you can have a dive into the ownership of a specific fund or entity, you cannot see the dotted lines, which make it much more complex to bear down on this. And open registers of beneficial ownership, transparency, letting sunlight be the best disinfectant. These are the ways you clamp down on dirty money, as I say, so often stolen from Africa and Africans through their huge resources by corrupt politicians, bent warlords, and corrupt business people as well. It's very, very important. And Parliament realised this in 2018 and 2019. Effectively, we defeated the government, rather embarrassing for me as a former chief whip to defeat my own party in government, by saying that the overseas territories must accept these open registers. And also, with the same breath, that the Crown dependencies, the Isle of Man, Guernsey and Jersey, must do likewise. Since when, I'm afraid, progress has been patchy. That is partly because the baddies have all the best tunes. They have the money, the expensive lawyers, and the expensive accountants. And of course, for the British authorities, they operate with a budget. If they lose a case, and if they take a case to the limit and they lose it, it could wipe out all their budget for the year. These are very significant factors in working out how to deploy the forces of law and order in this area in Britain. And those are decisions which the National Crime Agency and the other agencies have to take. But it's made much more difficult by the fact, as I say, that the baddies have the monies and the best tunes. One of the fallacies is that in the overseas territories is that if they aren't allowed to manage dirty money, then they won't have any money, and there'll be a bigger cost on the British diminishing development budget. I think the example of Cayman and indeed BVI is that if you clean up your act, then you will get business from major American banks. And the more we narrow the footprint of these entities, then the more people will have to go to much less secure and safe entities for their ill-gotten gains than the overseas territories. And remember, above all, because the overseas territories and the Crown dependencies are quite resistant to all of this. I mean, we haven't got there in the last 6 years, where we hoped we would get there within 3 years. Remember this: if these entities want to have our monarch and our laws and our trade and customs, they must also accept our moral values. And that's why we need to persist with this with all strength and all determination. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Just a few seconds over there, but we'll let you off this time.
I see.
And without further ado, then I will hand you over to John Penrose.
Thank you very much. And I'd start by saying I agree with all of what Andrew has said. And let me build on the foundation that he's just laid for us all there. The points I make is it isn't just money that's been stolen for Africa. I mean, that is a major problem which is, to our shame, is being washed through British financial centres. It's also money that's been stolen by organised criminals and by kleptocrats from all other countries, many other countries in the world. So there's large chunks of it that comes from Asia, there's large chunks of it that comes from Russia, and there's large chunks of it that comes from stateless organised criminals, the people who are organising the small boats, the criminal gangs, for example. They have to put the money somewhere. They're making vast amounts of profit. What do you do with it? Well, you try and launder it so it looks so it becomes spendable. How do you do that? Well, as Andrew's rightly pointed out, you try and wash it through places where you think you can make it look like it's honestly come by. And we have had, as Andrew says, for about 5 or 6 years now, had a proper blueprint for cleaning this up. Our problem is the implementation of that blueprint, and there is still further to go. I would argue as well that there are a couple of other things that we also need to be careful of. It isn't just money washing through and coming out and going off to the rest of the world, dirty money trying to be cleaned up on its way past. Some of it stays. Some of it gets invested in the UK in property or whatever else it might be, and is used for all sorts of sometimes clean purposes because they want a clean place for their criminals want a clean place for their children to come and live, and a safer place for their children to come and live. But some of it also gets used for subverting UK life as well. And that can be anything from trashing existing UK companies and brands through to trying to divert or pervert UK elections, through to all sorts of other things which we all need to be careful about. So this money may be laundered, but that does not make it clean. It still means that it's there being run by some very, very nasty people for very, very nasty purposes. So we need to be careful about that part of it too. The final point I make is I think that I said we have a blueprint which is partly implemented and needs to be fully implemented. I'd add a couple of things where the blueprint isn't perfect. One of them is in trusts. We're very, very good, we're fairly good at spotting where money is going with companies and shell companies. We now have, in theory at least, the way of following the money. And bear in mind, incidentally, that Al Capone, if you remember him, he was never done for being a gangster. He was done for tax fraud. And the reason why he was done for tax fraud is you can follow the money. That's what this transparency stuff is all about. But you can't follow the money outside companies if it goes through trusts nearly so easily. There are some protections around trusts, but we need to extend those, need to make their data much more public in order so that people can follow where that money is going in the same way and with the same ease as we do with companies. Ditto, we haven't really spent very much time so far talking about foundations, that's charities and everything else, and they have the potential to be misused as well. And the clever lawyers will find ways of misusing them if we manage to close down all the other bits and pieces. And the final thing is one of the bits that we are missing in this country, and we missed in the last anti-corruption strategy, and the next one, which is much delayed, is due out, I'm told, in a couple of months, but it's been due out in a couple of months for a couple of years, so we'll wait and see it when it comes up. But when it does, please, all of you, and all of us in this room, let's check on whether or not it includes a chapter on political ethics and integrity. That was missing last time. We should have put it in. It needs to be in next time. There is an ethical and integrity reset that's required in both Westminster and in Whitehall and in local government. And without it, that document will be incomplete and our protections will be incomplete as well.
Thank you very much, John. Actually, under time on that one. So, well, brilliant. I'll hand you over then to Kat Neelan for a journalistic perspective.
Thank you. I want to talk a bit more narrowly about the impact on the political system and political funding in general, and the opacity that exists at the minute, and the fact that technology and changes to the way things are being done are sort of outpacing even our current ability to manage them. So there's been a lot of chat about crypto. Obviously, Reform has said that they will be accepting crypto donations. There is a huge amount of concern, I think, from a lot of people across party, I would say, about this because of the level of opacity that has. It's not just about actually being able to trace the donor and to trace how far back the donor is, but there are systems that this allows people to make sort of multiple sub-threshold donations that would never be flagged. But in the sort of space of a few seconds using AI, you can make thousands and thousands of these and make a very significant donation. So I think there are real concerns about that. And I know that there are moves within Parliament to try and make sure that the forthcoming elections bill does have a sort of a prohibition around that. It does not currently mention that in the documents that we've seen so far. And it is obviously a concern because it has potential links to dirty money, Russia, and also and other sort of hostile states, as well as organised crime. So the extent to which it may be able to manipulate our political system is a big concern. And I think this kind of also brings me back to my broader argument, which is that for a long time we've kind of survived on the good chaps theory of government and of knocking about on conventions. We've seen in sort of recent years that actually conventions can be very easily ignored and brushed aside. And so I think that there is a sort of real sense that actually regulation needs to catch up with that, and actually at the minute is being so far left behind. So one of the things that I think is also worth noting is that, of course, the Electoral Commission only looks at registered political parties. So when you are looking at something, for example, like the funding of the Tommy Robinson March that was held in London fairly recently, which we know there was lots of merchandise, there were banners saying it was being sponsored by such and such crypto company, which, by the way, is under investigation in the States. And also we saw Elon Musk speaking. There were sort of allusions to the fact that he may or may not have given more than just his time, but we will never know because that does not come under the auspices of the Electoral Commission. And I think this is the kind of thing that we as a sort of society, as some of the politicians that obviously have a privileged position and power actually probably need to raise with ministers so that they see that it's not just the sort of narrow world of political parties that should be looked at. And actually, just to pick up on what John was saying there about foundations, I think also think tanks, no offence, think tanks probably need to be part of that as well, because we are seeing a proliferation of groups that are set up that are nominally think tanks, but in reality I would say they look more like fundraising vehicles that are being used as sort of proxies to help attract money that it would not legitimately be allowed to go to a UK political party. And they are being used to fund policy research. They are being used to find candidates for future elections and to find sort of broader spokespeople for parties that don't have that infrastructure. So we really need to get our skates on as a country and not just think, well, we've been okay so far, because we haven't really been, and we certainly won't be if we don't address some of these new challenges sooner rather than later.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kat. Brilliant. And then to round out our opening contributions, I'll invite Daniel to speak.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. John referenced the money that stays in the economy, the dirty money that doesn't just go in and out. In our research, we have found £6.7 billion worth of property, which has been invested in the UK in recent years using suspicious funds, of which 1.5 billion of it is linked to Russian nationals accused of corruption or with direct links to the Kremlin regime. So this isn't just a moral issue, as has been very profoundly set out by fellow panellists. There is also, as repeatedly recognised by governments of different complexions, a national security consideration as well. This panel title talks about the age of Trump, but Mark II perhaps. So if I can just go back to before then and really talk about the age of Putin's full-scale aggression in Ukraine, because it was that actually really inspired the former Conservative government to get on with a couple of really critical pieces of legislation which have taken us some way in the direction of closing down the loopholes allowing this dirty money into UK politics. We had two really important pieces of economic crime legislation passed by the last government. In respect of our concern this morning, it did a couple of things. Firstly, it sought to prevent the anonymous ownership of property in the UK by setting up a register of overseas entities and their beneficial owners, and preventing the use and abuse of shell companies to do that, for example, and began the long overdue process of reforming Companies House, our corporate register, which has long been used and abused by those with something to hide, because it was essentially a passive receiver of information, a library, exactly, and it needs to move to being an active enforcer of the data that it receives. A couple of years down the line, we can start to see the loopholes emerging in some of this legislation. John has already mentioned trusts. Again, of those billions that I talked about earlier, around 2.5 billion of suspicious wealth is linked to assets owned through opaque trust structures. So these are very significant numbers indeed. And before the election, wheels were turning on reform of anti-money laundering supervision as well. That is the regulatory environment that is there to ensure that the professionals in this country, who should be our first line of defence against dirty money finding its way into the economy, are doing their job and not being either unwitting or complicit enablers. Then we had an election, change of government, and then we got Trump round 2 as well, and that's shifted things on a number of fronts. Zooming out a bit wider, as Kat has mentioned, we really are seeing in erstwhile allied democracies the rise of mega money politics and the rise of opacity in the way that funds are being poured into our politics through the use of cryptocurrencies and the like. And so our endeavours have to tackle those risks going forward. We've got to close down those loopholes, allowing trusts to own property anonymously still. Andrew's talked about the overseas territories. Multiple deadline after deadline after deadline has been missed by the overseas territories in particular in opening up their corporate registers to scrutiny. And still now we are only talking about very limited access to data. We published a blueprint recently to help the overseas territories make progress towards those so-called legitimate interest access registers, but we need full transparent ownership of corporate structures in the secrecy jurisdictions to be able to tackle this issue. And more broadly, we've got to tackle the political financing environment that sort of wraps into all of this. The elections bill that we expect from the government doesn't go far enough in this area, but it's a step in the right direction. Don't want it to be all doom and gloom. There are opportunities coming up over the next year or so to move some of this stuff forward, but I expect we'll get into some of that in the discussion.
And pretty much bang on 4 minutes, Daniel. So very much a Goldilocks sort of, too short, too long, and perfect. Anyway, brilliant. That leaves us plenty of time to get some questions from the floor. So, any questions on corruption, on the age of Trump, on illicit finance, all these sorts of things? I will take them in groups of 3, so we'll do 3 questions at a time, and then members of the panel can jump in on questions they feel most suited to. Cyril should be roving around with a microphone. So let's have the first round of questions. Anyone got any? Please raise a hand. Any ideas? This gentleman here at the front, and then we'll go to a couple at the back over there.
Thank you very much. My name's Alan Young. My question comes from a slightly different angle, and that is, I'd be very interested in the views on the panel about the dangers of pushing too far and too generically on a lot of particularly anti-money laundering legislation, with the risk that ordinary people like us end up caught up in it and having to engage in endless compliance that probably isn't necessary. And a lot of people in this room will be politically exposed persons and will have been through all that, no doubt, with their bank and so on and so forth. So I'm just interested in this slightly different angle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we had a few at the back.
Hi, Paul Cook from the One campaign. As I'm sure you know, the government's meant to be doing a summit on illicit finance early next year. So I guess question to the panel would be, if there was one thing you would push the government to deliver that's really meaningful and practical out of that summit, what would it be? And I guess in light of the unfortunate announcement on the stage this morning about reducing the overseas aid budget, we're very conscious that seizing and returning assets might be something that's really, really important at this time going into a more constrained financial environment.
And there was one further question at the back there. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Lucy. I'm from Open Seas. We're a marine conservation charity. We're also part of the Coalition for Fisheries Transparency, promoting the Global Charter for Fisheries Transparency. Fisheries supply chains can be at a global level quite opaque. So I'd love to hear from the panel any thoughts on how some of the issues you've been talking about in terms of UBO, for fishing vessels, etc., can help to bring to expose illegality in some of our extractive and productive sectors as much as finance.
Excellent. A real range of questions there. So we've got the dangers of sort of implicating ordinary people, one on the illicit finance summit and one key area for delivery, and then on fisheries and opacity and supply chains there. Anyone willing to jump in on any of those? Andrew?
Very happy, yes. So, first of all, I completely agree with you about the dangers of introducing a cat's cradle of restrictions which impede the honest person carrying on their business and don't impede the villain. And indeed, I remember when I came back into the House of Commons after 2001, there was some Blair legislation about tackling corruption in the city, and it occurred to me to ask the Minister, how big is the problem of corruption in the City of London? And he hadn't got a clue. So I said, because obviously if it's 10 billion a year, you want very different sorts of programmes to bear down on it, then it's 100 billion a year. And they didn't really have a clue. So I completely take your point about not fettering the honest person carrying about their business and damaging London, indeed, as a financial centre, while not actually stopping the villain. However, in what I was talking about, and much of what John was talking about, we're dealing with a different thing. We're dealing with the business of opaqueness of entities in the overseas territories and the Crown dependencies, where we know, because of the Paradise Papers and other things as well, that the regulation is not good enough, and that's why we have sought to introduce these changes, which we're not necessarily doing very well about. On Paul's question about the illicit, the summit on illicit money, what would I like to see? I would like to see the government making it absolutely clear to the three Crown dependencies and the overseas territories, many of whom are compliant, but the key ones are Cayman and BVI, absolutely clear that they have to embrace open registers. None of this business of tipping people off 3 days before you get access to see it, which is clearly completely ridiculous. Is it the Cayman that came up with that one?
BVI.
BVI. Well, that was completely ridiculous. They must think we came up with terms on a bicycle. But so the government saying overseas territories, Crown dependencies, will introduce open registers of beneficial ownership, as Parliament made clear in 2018 that they must. And if they don't, the government will issue an order in council, which has already been drafted, to insist that they do it, because that is the will of Westminster. In the end, they will squeal about doing that, but in the end, they will implement it because they don't want their own legislatures overruled by this arcane instrument of an order in council. That's particularly true of the Crown dependencies, who have ancient and distinguished, long-serving parliaments. And so that's what I would like to see. On fish, I'm afraid I can't say anything about fish, but on the extractive industries, that is incredibly important. And some time ago, at the British behest, we set up the EITI, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Unbelievably important, because what it does, if I'm taking something I do know about, which is minerals from Africa, it brings a degree of transparency, which is so important throughout all of this stuff. And it means that a government that is giving a license, the amount of money that's being paid by business for that license, what happens with that money, so that we know the people of that country are getting some value from their indigenous indigenous extractives, and then what happens to it. Transparency, EITI, all of that stuff is the answer to this.
Excellent. Any other panelists want to jump in on?
I'd like to talk about the summit, if I may. I mean,
sure.
Ditto to what Andrew says, but also it must be a summit with commitments. It cannot be a talking shop. And actually, if you go back, what will then be about 10 years, to the Cameron government's anti-corruption summit in 2016, that was actually a really good example of summitry that brings together nation states that can work together on a common set of issues and commit to a roadmap of real demonstrable, be it legislative or regulatory change or other measures in their own nation context, which can be followed up upon. And what used to be the Department for International Development did an excellent job of supporting work to allow that follow-up to happen. We won't get anywhere if we just get lost in a kind of diplomatic jamboree of different sort of types of economies pulling in different directions. It should be a real opportunity if it's done well. And also, sorry, I know you asked for one idea, but a point I wish to make is that where I think government and diplomacy has a role to play, that, for example, the role that those of us in civil society cannot, is with emergent financial centres in less open, less democratic regimes, and the role that they need to play in tackling some of the issues that we've already talked about this morning. On the anti-money laundering supervision question, my father-in-law often bemoans to me, knowing the profession that I'm in, that why it is so bureaucratic for him to exchange €100 at the post office, or heaven forbid to try and buy a house. He said, well, I'm a good bloke, they should just know that, shouldn't I? And it's something that I hear a lot, but it is correct that what we're going after here is a different part of the problem. And actually, if anything, what we've been saying to governments of different complexions for some years now is the system actually needs a simplification. Because part of this problem of professional enablers of corrupt money moving around the world that I've talked about is that there are so many fragmented regulators of money laundering supervision and few teeth in terms of fines or consequences for those particularly outside the financial services sector, and that really needs to change. Again, the Conservative government was moving the wheels on reforming this. Then we had an election. We are expecting an announcement soon. We hope that it is a simplified system with greater teeth. And Lucy, I'd love to talk about fisheries maybe in the margins. There is a particularly litigious Icelandic fishing company of which you may be aware. And because they're particularly litigious, I will choose my words very carefully. But the so-called fish rot scandal is a very good example of how lesser developed countries can have their resources exploited by companies with deep enough pockets to do it. It's worth a Google for everyone else in the room who isn't necessarily as closely associated with the fishing industry. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Daniel. Kat or John, anyone to come in here at all, or go to another round?
My one thought is on the illicit finance summit, which I think that after the kleptocrat capture task force was shut down in America, there's an opportunity for the UK to kind of step up, as we've seen on defence and other things, and sort of be the convening voice on something that would have a kind of global reach, and sort of signal that we are not kind of going to take it lightly. But in order to do that, we need to get our house in order first. And so I think that there's probably quite a lot of work that would need to be done before we could be quite so sort of pious on the world stage.
And very briefly, before we move on to the next round of questions, the only thing I'd add to that is I'm sure we can improve the blueprint of regulations. That's what most of us have been answering in terms of the bit that we haven't talked about, but is absolutely essential, is we have a very big enforcement gap in this country. The number of people who are paid to investigate this stuff and then go after the wrongdoers is too few, and they are under-resourced. If we really want to improve our heft at international gatherings of any kind, and elsewhere anyway, we should up our enforcement efforts. They should be self-financing, for goodness sake, after all. But if we up our enforcement efforts, then that will send a much, much stronger message, not just to the good guys and girls, the people who get and understand the problem. It will also send an even more powerful message to the people who are helping and are the bad guys. And those are the people who we want to frighten away. There is, after all, let's not forget, a great deal more good, clean money in the world than dirty.
Excellent. Let's go to another round of questions. So, hands in the air. Anyone that wants to ask. So, we'll go to this gentleman here. We'll go to here as well, and then at the back.
Paul Hewis from Great Yarmouth. Trump's recently legalised cryptocurrency, which of course has made it possible for his immediate family to make a shed load of money. It's called cryptocurrency from the Greek word kryptos, meaning hidden. Is there any legitimate reason, or should I say any reason, to use cryptocurrency other than because you're a dodgy geezer with dirty money?
Thank you very much. To the point. And this gentleman here.
Thank you. I was also going to ask about cryptocurrency, and you mentioned reform and people receiving donations from abroad, Elon Musk and stuff like that. I saw that in America, and I think that's something that might capture the imagination of the voters come the next election, and perhaps a key differentiation point between Conservatives and Reform. Is there likely to be a Conservative plan for dealing with that come the next election? Are we working on that?
Thank you very much. And then right at the back.
Hi there, Peter Munro from the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition, and I declare an interest in this event. I was going to ask it's very similar to that question, almost a follow-on, a very political question. How do Conservatives talk about corruption and anti-corruption over the next few years? There was a lot of issues in the previous government around PPE, which was mentioned at the start. Labour have taken this as an opportunity to implement an Ethics and Integrity Commission. There's a new anti-corruption strategy coming out. There's a lot of work on the corruption front in government that the opposition can respond to. In terms of battling against reform, whatever the party's political choices are over the next few years, how does corruption become part of that, and how does the party talk about this over the next few years?
Excellent. That's a trio of questions that fits almost mind-bogglingly well together. So we've got crypto and dodgy geezers, what the real reason is for anyone to use it. crypto and then sort of differentiation between Conservatives and Reform, and then lastly, more another political question, particularly about sort of how Conservatives really can talk about corruption and crypto and things sorts of this, and whether that can be a point of difference. So, open that up to anyone that's interested. Who can I tempt with one of those three?
Do you want me to
John, perhaps? Yeah.
Shall I have a go at the crypto stuff? Because the attractions of crypto are twofold, I think. Others may be able to add to this. One is it's got the same attractions as cash, right? It is fundamentally a relatively liquid and anonymous way of paying for things. And so nowadays we hardly carry any cash compared to before the pandemic, but it has the same attractions as that. There is, however, another bit which some people in the libertarian fringes of politics get really excited about, because it's potentially an alternative to fiat money, to money created by central banks, and it's the same kind of thinking as people who are gold bugs and love gold-based currencies have as well. So that there's a sort of a slightly, to my mind, being more sort of traditionally economic approach from free market here. It's an odd thing, but it really does exist, and it's quite strongly held amongst a relatively small number of people. But those are the two reasons why people love. Those are the two legitimate reasons why people love crypto. And then there's the suspicion that actually the real reason why quite a lot of other people like crypto is because it allows them to hide dodgy transactions, and that is the bit that. But it is important. This is the point which we heard earlier on about this point about how do we deal with regulation of anti-money laundering without ensnaring ordinary honest people in unnecessary regulations. It is important, therefore, that whatever we do on crypto doesn't stop people from using something if it's safe and if it's not criminal. So I think we need to tread quite carefully here. There are some legitimate reasons, but there are also plenty of illegitimate reasons for crypto, and therefore that requires a carefulness of approach in order to make sure that we don't go into overkill. But there is definitely something dangerous that needs to be captured at the same time. I'm not aware, but Andrew may be able to fill us in, of a Conservative plan for crypto beyond that. And if there is, then please tell us, Andrew, because I ain't heard it yet.
No, nor am I.
Sorry.
I used to work in the City of London, and a very wise banker once said to me, never invest in anything you don't fully understand. And I was in a taxi the other day when the taxi driver was explaining to me he'd made a fortune out of crypto and just bought himself a Tesla. And another person told me that once taxi drivers are talking about an investment, it's definitely time to sell. So that's all I have to say about crypto. However, on the final question, I think that I'm not really talking about Lady Moan and PE. I'm talking about the international, because that's my background in international development. But I would like to say that this has been done in Parliament on an all-party basis, and I worked incredibly closely with Margaret Hodge, who is now the government's anti-corruption successor. She's the successor to.
If you haven't met her, she's redoubtable.
and I went with her on a state visit to the 3 crown dependencies, and I think I'm quite robust, but she was far more robust than me. And that joint all-party effort was what led us to be able to defeat the government. The government capitulated and accepted an amendment for us because they would have lost if they'd let it go to the floor of the House. And that cross-party working, clearly Reform aren't going to be part of it, but that cross-party working is terribly important. And indeed, I am the co-chair of the all-party group, which I was doing with Joe Powell. And because this is such a dreadful government, and he's rather good, he's now, very early on in his career, been called in to be a Treasury Minister, I think. So he's no longer there, but we'll find another one to co-chair. But this business of working together not only gives us, I think, a stronger voice inside Parliament, but it gives us a stronger voice in working with the executive and with government too.
Kat, you mentioned in your opening remarks about sort of the Reform and United Kingdom march and things like that. I wondered if you wanted to come in perhaps on the sort of differentiation between Reform and the Conservatives. Are there sort of the overlap there, and sort of what the opportunities or challenges might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think Reform is the only political party that has said it is accepting crypto. There is certainly from the Labour side a push to try and get a ban on crypto added to the elections bill. I'd be very surprised if the Conservatives didn't agree with them and weren't also making moves on that front. Just to the point about crypto being dodgy, I just also wanted to kind of slightly to sort of pick up on some of the stuff that John was saying, but this idea of it being a sort of anti-establishment, freedom, liberating sort of currency that is really kind of seems to be sort of infuse the kind of communities that talk about it. And when we were doing some research around the backing the sponsors of the Unite the Right march, Telegram, which is, you know, for people that don't know, is another one of these social media platforms, but it's kind of a closed channels, is full of groups that just talk about crypto and immigration, or crypto and anti-establishment politics. And there are groups that are really just dedicated to this. And we saw that there were, obviously there were a couple of crypto groups that were supporting the rally. There've also been crypto groups that are were sponsoring Reform's party conference. Again, one of them has its ultimate parent company is based in the BVI. So the layers of opacity are quite extreme when you kind of dig into it. And just on the point about the Tories, I think that there are obviously there is this sort of sense that with some of the sort of chat about some of the Russian donations and COVID, that, you know, that the party had a sort of corrupt core, and I don't think that's true at all. I think that, you know, you look at, to quote your colleague Tom Tugendhat, he once said to me, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Which is a kind of noble approach, but not necessarily one that was always shared by some of your colleagues. And I think kind of comes back to my earlier point about the Good Chaps Convention, which is that, you know, the effectively the know your donor checks aren't really up to scratch because they only go one layer. And this is where you need to, it's not just about crypto, it's about all of the donations coming through. You really need to know what the ultimate source of that money is.
Can I just add to that as well? I think this stuff about ethics and integrity at Westminster, it's crucial, as I said in my opening remarks, that we get better at this. But to Andrew's point about it not becoming a party political issue, if the Angela Rayner and now, for the third time, the Peter Mandelson resignation has taught this country anything, it is that nobody is perfect. And it is a huge mistake for any political party to think that they are uniquely morally gifted and everybody else is somehow morally inferior. If we start thinking like that, and if any other party starts thinking like that...
You're talking about the Liberal Democrats, aren't you?
I couldn't possibly comment. But if any of us start thinking like that, then, you know, we are really, really riding for a fall, because, you know, humans are frail creatures and we're all, you know, subject to making mistakes. So I think that a dose of humility and a lack of moral smugness by all politicians in all parties is really helpful here, and therefore an acceptance that a cross-party approach to trying to clean the thing up is by far the better way of, a most productive way of doing it.
Can I just add one last thought? Just actually slightly picking up on what Andrew was saying about the reshuffle, though I'm not going to join the partisan point, but because there was a reshuffle, and actually even before that, the minister in charge of the elections bill had to resign because of things. There wasn't a person in charge of this piece of legislation for a very long time, and even after the reshuffle, there was a lot of confusion, both from MPs and campaigners, about who exactly it was. The minister in charge is Samantha Dixon, and she's not hugely well known either within the party or the wider sort of parliamentary group, because she's quite a new intake. But I just sort of thought it was quite telling that this piece of legislation, which was in the Labour manifesto and is seen as a really important piece of work, has not had the sort of prioritisation that I think it should have, and that they indicated it would have before the election.
If I may, I think, you know, that forthcoming piece of legislation, the elections bill, was quite preoccupied with a couple of things. One was better transparency of political donations, and was especially concerned with foreign money getting around the rules preventing foreign donations into UK politics. And so, you know, back to the point on crypto, you know, I think we're playing catch up here because, you know, crypto allows both of those things to happen. The Electoral Commission is quite exercised about this. Those of us in civil society are. It is the polar opposite of everything that those of us in the transparency and accountability community have been calling for when it comes to understanding who's funding our politics, whichever party that may be. So there is some catching up to be done there. I think there are simple things that the bill could do. We've long campaigned for a lowering of the donation transparency threshold to be in line with the permissibility threshold at £500. So if the trouble is with crypto, if you don't know who's giving it to you, then you can't have a crypto donation of £501 or more. Or, as Kat says, the government may wish to go further and seek to outlaw it altogether. I think there's political jeopardy in that for reasons those of us in the room who are more politically engaged than I am will be able to interpret. But it's a real problem, and we've got to catch up.
Thank you. I'll just abuse my privilege as chair one moment before I go to the next round of questions. It was a quote from John that actually made me think. The dose of humility made me think about the title of this panel event, and a certain DJ Trump that hasn't really been mentioned. We've been quite good at not really talking about him yet. I wanted to ask the panel, perhaps Andrew might want to come in on this. To what extent are our domestic kind of unilateral levers on this, our noble best efforts, where they arrive, are they limited by these sort of international currents and trends with Donald Trump in the White House, with other sort of populist movements and things like that? To what extent are we sort of on a tide in some sense, and where does that impact our ability to cooperate internationally on these things?
Well, I think the issue we have is where I started, which is that credible research makes clear that we've got a serious dog in this fight, because up to 40% of all global dirty money comes through London, overseas territories and crown dependencies. I mean, that is a very, very stark statistic, and addressing that is quite enough for us to do without engaging with Donald Trump on this issue. And indeed, when we were doing this, the Open Registers legislation, I was invited by the Senate Banking Committee to go to them and talk about it, because the Americans have introduced closed registers, or are introducing them across various states. But Delaware and Joe Biden, coming from Delaware, made it quite difficult to even talk about open registers. And my judgment is that they will actually introduce open registers at some point, because there'll be scandals which will drive that argument within American society, but it won't happen anytime soon. So I think we've got a big agenda in Britain to address, and I don't think we need to fuss too much about Donald Trump.
Glad to hear it. Right, I think we've probably got time for another round of questions. So, hands in the air. This gentleman here. We'll go to the gentleman at the back, and then Bartek at the front as well.
Thank you very much. One of the recent scandals that has come up that does in fact involve Trump, Farage got his bank account closed. Everyone wondered why a Conservative government didn't do the obvious thing and protect, including people in this room, from having their bank accounts closed because of their political views. There was never any reason why not, apart from it later transpired that the Biden administration had been going around secretly debanking loads of Trump donors. About 50 businessmen were suddenly told they had no banking access because they'd supported Trump. Is it the fact that actually the British government refused to protect British citizens against being debanked because the Biden administration didn't want Trump supporters to be able to go and get British bank accounts? Thank you.
Hi, John Johnston from Politico. So many of these panels over the years have discussed these exact same topics with the exact same solutions, and yet incremental progress from governments of all kinds. Why do you think there's no political appetite just to pull the trigger and fix the issues that everyone's been talking about for so long?
And then to Bartek at the front here.
Thank you. Bartek Stanishevsky. I wrote the questions for the panel, so here's another one. If there is a corrupt regulator The obvious way to get rid of them is to appoint a friend of yours whom you trust. And if there is a dodgy geezer spending dirty money, the obvious solution is to seize their assets. The Met actually recently seized a bunch of crypto, and people are joking that they did it to fund the NHS for 3 more minutes. There is obviously a perverse incentive there. How do we manage this? And how do we convince voters that measures intended to tackle dirty money are not, in fact, just self-serving?
Thank you very much. Excellent. So just to recap there, we've got a question on debanking and the Biden administration, and then a real challenge from John there on about panel discussions and indeed political appetite for real change. Why does it not exist? Why has it been so incremental, the progress? And then lastly from Bartek on seizing assets. How do we convince the public that these are genuinely going to improve the situation rather than being self-serving? So where can I start? Who wants to jump in? John?
Can I start on the point about zero progress? Because I'm a bit more glass half full than you are, sir. And the reason why is because, as we heard in the opening couple of set of comments, we had 2 really quite serious pieces of legislation in the last government, triggered, I think, by the Russian invasion of Ukraine and a way to try and stop some of the money that was financing the Russian state from flowing quite so easily through the UK. Those were not nothing. Those were very, very serious, very, very material steps forward in this country's journey. And Andrew's already given us a sort of quick history lesson on some of the other things that have happened, all of which, this place is unrecognisable compared to where we were 10, 15 years ago, because of some of the things which people like David Cameron kicked off, and Andrew has been sort of pushing all this time as well. However, glass being half full means that there's still an awful lot of air in the top of the glass, right? So I'm not trying to say there isn't an awful lot further to go. That's why I started off my opening remarks by saying there's 3 or 4 things that I'd like to see in terms of the closing loopholes and dealing with the shortcomings in our existing blueprint, plus as well that missing piece of enforcement, because I don't think we're being nearly tough enough on it. So I think there's been more progress than you, but have we got further to go? Yes, we flipping have.
There we go. Anyone on debanking, perhaps? Or?
So on debanking, I rather think that the Farage thing worked as it should have done. What happened was that his account was shut for wholly bogus reasons. The bank then was exposed as having shut it for totally bogus reasons, and Farage came up on the day. So I mean, I think there must be an argument that the system actually worked in that respect. I don't think I've got anything very intelligent to say about Bartek's brilliant question. Though John, I think, it's more John's line than mine. But why is the progress too slow? It's a very good question. We've been driven up the wall about this. I originally did the deal with the Crown dependencies at the annual Trafalgar Day dinner in the East India and Public Schoolboys Club in London with the Guernsey First Minister, and he said, if you give us an extra year, we will do it, because Margaret Hodge had done her stuff, I'd done my stuff, and we were closing in on them. But it hasn't happened, and the reason it hasn't happened is this: that what happens in the overseas territories and in the Crown dependencies is that the practitioners go along to the governor and they say, this is intolerable, these bloody MPs trying to eat our lunch. And you've got to do something about it. And so what do the governors do? They ring the Queen's, as she was then, the King's now, they ring the private secretary in Buckingham Palace and they say, I'm telling you as governor there's going to be real trouble about this in your territories, and someone's got to do something about it. So what does Buckingham Palace do? The private secretary rings up Downing Street and says, can't you call off these bloody MPs who are causing all this trouble and upsetting people? And when we introduced this measure, Mrs. May called in the leader of the SNP in Parliament to try and burn him off supporting it, on the grounds that this was overmighty action on a small territory, and the Scots shouldn't stand for it. It's quite a smart argument for number 10 to come up to, but Ian Blackwood wasn't taking that, and so he wasn't burnt off. So there's all sorts of wheels within wheels on all of this, I remember asking Mrs. May whether she would introduce the Magnitsky legislation. And she said no, she wouldn't. She said. And then the awful events in Salisbury happened, where the Russians. So I got up and asked her precisely the same question again about a week later, saying, might she introduce the Magnitsky legislation? And she said yes. So you see, this is a very difficult area. It's highly technical. And the third and last reason is my point I made. It's the baddies who have the best tunes. They have the money. They can hire the best lawyers, the best bent accountant. And that is why it's so important to get these open registers, so you can follow the dotted lines. You can see who's doing what with whom and where. That's what we've got to press for. And I hope this summit will help. And you know, when I was in the Foreign Office, I mean, I had so much to do. I couldn't really focus on this. There was another minister responsible. But even in the Foreign Office, you know, they have close relationships with senior people in the overseas territories and crown dependencies. You know, they require ministerial direction to say, you know, officials advise ministers decide, go and tell them they're getting an order in council next month unless they agree to do what the Westminster Parliament has said that they must.
Daniel, perhaps, did you want to come in on any of those?
I mean, I think, yeah, to John's point, I mean, absolutely, you know, glacial progress in some of these areas that have been talked about for, you know, again, if I think about the overseas territory stuff, you know, a decade, and still we're trying to extract some of these reforms that Andrew's set out. But equally, I share the view that, you know, we have taken incremental steps forward. The pace of change across multiple governments now is frustrating at times. Where is the opportunity, though? We do anticipate the government's long overdue anti-corruption strategy to be published this side of Christmas. I sincerely hope and share John's aspiration that it is robust on matters of domestic integrity and tackling political corruption, be that in Westminster, Whitehall, or local government, and filling that missing gap. The risk in its delivery, whatever it contains, based upon some of the developments that we've discussed today around political finance reform and slightly less on the ethics and integrity side, is that in delivery, the results are a little bit undercooked and don't achieve what they're intended to achieve, which I think is actually really harmful for trust in the political system writ large. So I think that the challenge and the opportunity to the Conservative Party in opposition is to really hold the government's feet to the fire on this kind of granular level detail, getting it, you know, making sure that it's not just sort of soundbite politics and soundbite delivery, but that the mechanisms and the bills and the legislation that's brought forward in these areas is robust and effective.
Excellent. Well, I think that's probably a fitting place for us to end a mission statement for some future progress, hopefully slightly less glacial in the years to come. Thank you very much to all the panelists for joining, and indeed for all the questions from you guys in the audience, and likewise from the UK Anti-Corruption Coalition for kindly supporting this event. That was a really interesting discussion, and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed chairing it. So just to say, we'll have 20 minutes after this event where you'll feel free to stick around, ask some questions of the panelists, have a chat amongst yourselves, a bit of networking. And last but not least, I'll just like to plug Bright Blue quickly. So we've got a very busy program of events here. Next up in the room, I think there's a panel on energy sponsored by EDF, where Andrew Bowie is going to be speaking. And also, as well as an events organisation, we do research as well, and we have a great group of members who are part of that discussion and come to events in London. So if you are interested in joining Bright Blue or supporting our work, then please do come and speak to me or to Bartek or any other colleagues around with lanyards on. So yeah, thank you very much again for joining, and I'll just ask for one final round of applause for our panellists.